Hello and welcome to the Horse Race Politics podcast. I'm one of your hosts, Dr. Bromfield, a man once described as an emotional support dog to his colleagues and someone who, if clean-shaven, would make it look like the university is violating child labour laws. Joining me is friend of the show, Dr. Luca Trenta, a man so Italian, so suave, so cool, calm and collected that even James Bond feels inadequate in comparison. And lastly, my co-host, Professor Matthew Wall, a man... Luca, thanks for joining us today. How are you doing?
Wow. These are getting more and more stinging.
Yeah, well, I mean...
it's getting worse every week. These introductions
I feel like there's some projection going on here.
Every projection is an accusation or whatever they say. But Luca, how are you? Friend of the show, you were previously on episode 6.
Okay,
for those who are interested in hearing more of Luca.
Yeah, that was quite a long time ago, I felt.
It was like a year ago. But one of our most popular episodes until we had Rob Ford on the show and he just took a dump on your episode.
Yeah,
I'm sorry.
Plummeted.
Yeah, exactly.
My ratings plummeted all of a sudden.
down.
Yeah, they're becoming progressively less popular. But yeah, no, thank you for having me. I think last time we were talking about mostly assassination and my book, and this week we're talking about something quite different. So I'm quite keen.
Yeah, there haven't really been any high-profile assassinations in the last year, so there's
no,
nothing
not
really to
yet.
talk
I'm
about.
patiently waiting for Trump to kill Maduro, allegedly, and then I might have a new addition to the book.
Just to be fair, Rob Ford did have a dog called Harold Wilson.
That's true.
And Luca does have dogs. So
Yeah, I should have brought them in.
I think
but
that's the next.
I don't think the university would have appreciated my dog running around.
No, and I think Matt might see it as an affront that we're trying to replace him as the co-host, so we can't be having that. But Matt, I think you wanted to kind of get the ball rolling today on the discussion because you don't think I do a good enough job of hosting the show. So.
No, we've had some frank feedback discussions about who leads the discussion.
My performance review was not good.
So, actually, funnily enough, Luca is my boss and I'm Louis' boss. So that's the accountability hierarchy that you're seeing here. No, so thanks very much for coming back on the podcast. And so essentially what we wanted to have you on to talk a little bit about was, I mean, we were just so fascinated with this Nathan Gill story. So we're really going to dive into that in this episode. But like part of the joy of working with the suave Italian James Bond type person is they occasionally share their books with you. And I think you shared with me Active Measures.
Yeah, Active Measures, yeah.
So I've neglected to return that loan. And I was rereading it. I mean, it's a thick book, so you kind of it's quite a good thing to read in like 10 or 15 minute vignettes of the crazy things that happened. But that book is called Active Measures. And it talks about political warfare as well as part of the same type of thing that the Nathan Gill story, I think, fits quite neatly into. So that's the being that you have this knowledge of the kind of literature. That was where I wanted to start off. Is like, what if one says in the kind of intelligence world this was an active measure, or in maybe in the 1950s one might have said this was a piece of political warfare. What does one mean?
So, I mean, Active Measures is a book by Thomas Reid, and Active Measures is the Soviet term, or the translation of the Soviet term, which I will not try to pronounce in Russian, for a series of operations that would fall under the label of covert operations. They are primarily understood as influence operations, so influence the opinion of certain politicians, of certain governments, of certain or the general public of certain states, in a variety really of manners. They can be disinformation, which you have mentioned. The use of front organizations, for example, can also be a method. The infiltration of movements, for example, famously.
Or sometimes the creation, right?
Or sometimes the creation of movements in the 1970s and 1980s. For example, the peace movement, the nuclear freeze movement, were infiltrated by the Soviet Union. I think the important thing to keep in mind, and I think we'll come back to this again and again, is that active measures are particularly tricky to assess because they are good at exploiting divisions, issues that are already present in the society that they target. So they don't create anything from scratch. They exploit grievances and divisions within a society that are already there. And for this reason, there is a conundrum as to whether we want to expose them and try to find the enemy's hand behind everything that is happening, which might lead us to lose credibility when we claim that everything, for example, is a Russian active measure. But at the same time, we shouldn't be worried to actually expose and report when we do have evidence that it is Russia's active measures. I should say that active measures go back to the early 1900s, if not earlier in certain forms. During the Cold War, both sides tended to do them, especially in the early Cold War. Both the CIA and the Soviet Union were heavily involved in.
I mean, it was like an industry.
Yeah.
It was of people.
It was an industry. It was a set of very large-scale projects. For example, the CIA had one that they called LC Klasok, which was basically the production of magazines and newspapers that look like the real one but contain disinformation and so on. Thomas Reid has this very famous argument that basically the CIA called itself out of the active measures game starting in the 1970s because you have an increased oversight of intelligence.
It's getting too hot in the kitchen, right?
Yeah. You're having an increased oversight of intelligence in the United States. And so he has this line that says you cannot excel at both democracy and disinformation.
Yeah, it's a good line.
Don't entirely buy it.
No, I don't buy it either.
But it is certainly true that the US involvement in active measures declined in the 1970s, as it did for many other covert operations. But I don't know. If you want, I can tell you a couple of famous examples. HIV and AIDS being a bioweapon created in Fort Detrick in Maryland. This was perhaps one of the most famous in the 1980s of Soviet active measures. But again, a few studies have shown that this is not something that the Soviet Union creates from scratch. It is building on already pre-existing conspiracies within certain communities and so on that then become exploited by a bigger story that is published, initially in a fairly obscure newspaper on the basis of course, like a fake report demonstrating all of this, and then is spread out and so on. But of course, in this and in many others, we see a combination of, is not entirely fictitious.
Yeah, there
is a seeding of pre-existing issues and elements that are actually true, like Fort Detrick does engage in production of weapons and all sorts of things. They didn't do they didn't do HIV and AIDS. So there is always an element of truth, and this is why they are particularly successful, because at one point it's difficult to distinguish which one is the true part and which one is the not so true one.
So the last time you were on the pod, we were reflecting on Trump's victory, and I was saying to you I was ontologically destabilized because it had been a sort of surprise where the election went, and I think I've been thinking a lot about disinformation because I teach a module on disinformation, and it does seem to me that the conundrum you talked about is really important for us to get our heads around as a polity, as a society, because nobody wants to think that they've been manipulated, right? And it's actually really dangerous from a kind of democratic perspective to attribute like the power to manipulate and the power and the kind of receptivity to be manipulated, because you start devaluing people's opinions. And this is like when we teach like intro to politics, we're like, what is power? And the third phase of power is the power of manipulation. But it's a really contentious one to analyze. And so I think that's where like oftentimes you've looked at a lot of state papers in the States. There will be ironclad evidence of an active measure, right? Oftentimes, I mean, I believe there was a minister in the Wilson government who was bought and paid for Czech-controlled agent, right? And Thatcher said, no, we're not going to release this. Because, and this is the conundrum, it's damaging for the kind of stability ontologically of the polity. Because if at any time you can just say, well, you're a Russian agent, it's like the two Spider-Men pointing at each other, and it completely it turns the kind of ability to interact into sludge. And yet, like, if you find out then that somebody knew about this and didn't tell you, can you trust them anymore?
Yeah, I mean, I think the issue is that the two extremes are very problematic. So on one side, it is very problematic to claim that there is a Russian hand, or back a few decades, a Soviet hand behind everything that is happening, because you end up in a sort of situation of like McCarthyism, in which you have to test the loyalty of citizens. And
Salem witch trial style situation, yeah.
But at the same time, as somebody in the Reagan administration in the 1980s put it, if you don't do anything, it will be like a drop on a stone. Like, if you keep looking at it, it doesn't make much of a difference. But over time, it might end up creating a massive hole in the society in which you're operating. You might recall from the episode that I'm not a particularly big fan of the Reagan administration, but they were very effective at fighting active measures. So in the 1980s, they had a working group, an active measure working group, which was like an interagency working group within the US government. And they did national and international campaigns to fight active measures. And they had this idea of creating a report, analyze, and publish methodology. So they would collect evidence, analyze the evidence, and if it was active measure, they would publish it via the media, via Congress.
Just publicly, like, deposit a document.
And they would expose this in order to raise the costs for the Soviet Union to engage in this type of activity. The problem was that I think this is not feasible today, to my mind, because at the time you had Congress was fully behind this effort, for example. Public opinion.
About the Cold War then. Yeah. So it was a different.
Public opinion was perhaps very much more receptive, that there was a clear problem coming from the Soviet Union in these areas. I think now we are in a very different situation. Both US Congress, UK Parliament, parliaments in Europe are very divided on these issues. There is a general mistrust of what governments in general say, what mainstream media say. So I think it would be very difficult to replicate something similar. But I find also very frustrating that there is not even an effort to try and do something about the problem.
Yeah, well, and I think, I mean, we're gonna transition over now to like the Nathan Gill topic, which is kind of what brought Louis and I back into this kind of spy world. But like, I think what's so interesting about these operations is that, like, the most successful operations, and it comes back to can you measure it or gauge it? Nobody knows about. Yeah. The fewer people who know, the more success that an operation succeeded, the more successful the operation. And so
this is very much a conundrum for covert operations in general. Like, if a covert operation is truly 100% successful,
you don't know
ideally you wouldn't know that it has happened. So the ones that we know about are very often either the ones that were revealed to us by the governments involved, or the ones that failed.
Yeah, or you know, another stages in this case, like intercepted a plot. So it just does seem to me, because we're going to talk about this Gill case, that, like, reading the way Gill is kind of characterized, or what's the name of the author again? That active measure, Reid.
Reid. Yeah.
Reading the way he's characterizing the transition of active measures across, like, the kind of cyber age, this feels to me like the Nathan Gill story, a remarkably, like,
old-fashioned.
Yeah. This is like George Smiley kind of territory. I can sort of see Smiley meeting with Gill or someone like him, and so I think that's what I want to kind of come back to a little bit, is the digital sphere, where I think a lot of this activity is happening. But let's, like, dive into this Nathan Gill story, because I think the three of us agree it's a big story. So let's kind of give it some air to breathe. And now, Louis, you've been having a look at this.
Yes, I have a brief summary of the whole story. Allegedly, before everything I say, Nathan, allegedly Gill, right, was so he's the leader of Reform UK Wales from March to May 2021, and UKIP Wales from 2014 to 2016. He was described as a key lieutenant to Nigel Farage, his enforcer, his right-hand man. He was an MEP for Wales from 2014 to 2020. and a member of the National Assembly for Wales from May 2016 to December 2017. So he's very, very active figure in Welsh politics.
Yeah, I mean, just to say, I mean, I remember in 2014, so Luca, you just joined the department around then, and I was doing like a news column for the local paper to try and get promoted back then. And when I saw Reform, or no, UKIP at that time had a gig, like an event at the Swansea Stadium. So I went along to cover it for the paper, and it was Nathan Gill who was like introducing Nigel Farage. You know, he was the speaker immediately before Farage. So I think it was largely understood that Gill was Farage's man in Wales.
Yeah.
Both in, I don't know, within the internal operation of these different parties, but in terms of like who's going to top the ticket, Nathan Gill.
So in terms of the story, and obviously if either of you know any more details or if I get anything wrong, do feel free to correct me. But in July 2021, FBI agents stopped, and I'm going to try and do pronunciations here. Oleg Voloshin. I think that's pretty good.
Wow.
A pro-Kremlin Ukrainian politician close to Viktor Medvedchuk, a Ukrainian oligarch and long-term ally of Vladimir Putin, in Washington, D.C. The FBI extracted WhatsApp messages from Voloshin's phone, in which he discussed secretly paying Nathan Gill. Gill was then arrested at Manchester Airport in September of the same year, and police found messages on his phone suggesting an agreement with Voloshin had been reached and that Gill accepted cash at least 8 times to make specific statements and opinions benefiting Russia. Various amounts totaling at least £10,000 were mentioned in their communications. And furthermore, Gill with 2 other MEPs, David Coburn and Jonathan Arnott, who were also part of the UKIP group in Brussels, visited Ukraine with Gill in October 2018. And in correspondence with The Guardian, Voloshin claims that 112 Ukraine, 112 Ukraine should have covered the MEP's travel costs on their trip. But in fact, declarations by the 3 to the European Parliament record their tickets as having been paid for by the European Centre for Democracy and Human Rights, a front created by Russian intelligence agents with the same name as a genuine organization.
That's a good bit.
The president of which was arrested in 2021 on suspicion of pro-Russia espionage. Voloshin is also reported to be connected deeply to efforts to destabilize the US. In 2022, he was sanctioned by the US government, stating that he worked with Russian actors to undermine Ukrainian government officials and advocate on behalf of Russia. So that's kind of like the abridged version of the Gill story. And Gill has since pleaded guilty. Which, from what I was reading, came as quite a shock to the prosecution. They were maybe expecting a bit more drawn-out affair.
Well, I think that's what opens up the story for public discussion.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I did it.
Is the guilty plea, because obviously working in the UK, they do have quite strict laws about libel and defamation. So, like, one's ability to cover this, even in a university podcast, is unlocked by a guilty plea.
Yes.
Right? Because, okay, he said he's done it. And then the reportage is digging into these details, and some of them are fascinating.
I mean, just a couple of bits to add, I guess, for elements of color, I think. One is that Medvedchuk is as close to Putin as you can get. Putin is the godfather of his daughter, I think. He is an oligarch who had various TV channels. He was eventually accused of treason, and his channels were removed from Ukrainian TV. Voloshin has a long career in various front groups, particularly electoral observation commissions, like, of course, partisan electoral observation commissions. And he started working in this context with the Polish man who was arrested as a Russian spy by Poland. There is a very good report published on this. And we'll touch upon this. This was published a long time ago and already mentioned Gill and the other 2 without making any particular splash. It was published and funded by the European Union. This is a study by somebody at Central European University, so it's a reputable study on this Polish spy, which already mentioned this sort of activities, and Voloshin was involved in them. And the other important figure in the picture is Voloshin's initial girlfriend and eventually wife, who worked with him in his various activities and so on, and was a very lively presence in Brussels. having various contacts with members of UKIP, including Gill, and there are at least, not allegedly, there are pictures on social media of her.
Your rival James Bond is on the T-shirt.
On her and Nigel Farage initially saying that she would miss him.
Yes.
And
leave and let die.
Yeah,
and on the T-shirt.
And on Nigel Farage holding up a T-shirt, like an anti-EU, pro-Brexit, basically T-shirt, which apparently is from a line of T-shirts that she had come up with as a new business.
I was thinking of getting some of these tees when
as a new business of political T-shirts. So, and the final bit of the puzzle, I guess, is that Voloshin, I believe, is the one who is connected to Klimnik, I can't pronounce it, who was very much at the center of the 2020, I can't remember if the 2016 or the 2020 campaign to influence the US presidential elections. So it's a widespread net of actors, agents.
Can I just add in one more detail, which, again, just to add some colour, but also to show the trajectory, I think, of these operations. Nathan Gill was arrested at the airport, Heathrow, I think? Manchester, and he was on his way to a conference, which was about the kind of opportunities that could arise by using cryptocurrency to fund political campaigns. So, like, that's literally, and the conference.
I think the conference was about making democracy safer or something, and it was given a paper about
exactly, and it just shows you the kind of cleverness, because the conference was like the protection of electoral integrity, and he was here to talk about how crypto can, because of the ledgers, right? Crypto, as far as I can tell, is
how the technology that gave us crypto can make elections safer or something like this. I think it was the title of his paper. When maybe
Gill's presentation was his how to make it worse, based on what I've done.
Well, if he could have just got to the crypto phase, he would have never got caught. Maybe we can talk a little bit about like the work, to be fair, of the British police. How does it come that you end up catching someone like this? Because it's not something that happens by accident, right? This requires an investigation over sustained time.
Yeah, I would assume so. We know very little details about the process of investigation, except the fact that it went through via the FBI, and of course Polish intelligence had also been very much on the case. Probably they were first on the case, or maybe not necessarily first, but they've done a lot of work in arresting this.
Because Nathan Gill was in the European Parliament. That's an important point to make. Well, we're kind of covering him from a Welsh perspective, but he was an MEP.
The money he received was to give speeches favorable to Russia in the European Parliament and in this television program in which he allegedly presented not necessarily pro-Russia, but like both sides are wrong here. We shouldn't do
fight repression with repression.
Yeah, because there is political repression on one side. There shouldn't be political repression on the other as well. So I think there is an international effort to investigate these set of actors. There is the Polish effort to catch the spy that had been involved in activities that, again, do very much have a Cold War flavor. So observatory missions for elections, a whole set of like anti-NATO protests in Poland, with another contact who is also working for Russian intelligence. And then on the US side, of course, you have investigations that are a follow-up of the 2016 US interference in the US elections, and of course,
probe, wasn't it?
And of course, there is a set of sanctions against certain actors, the identification of certain key players, and Voloshin is very much one of these key players, and is the one that transferred the money to Gill. What I think is quite interesting from my point of view is that, as we said in the summary, Gill is arrested in 2021. The Polish investigation also refers back to that time. And yet we almost have 3 years in which there is no discussion in the media, there is no revelations regarding these.
I mean, like Louis and I were saying, we're following UK politics pretty closely, and obviously, like literally every time I go to a media appearance about Reform UK, like we have to talk about that, and yet, niente, as the Italians
No,
would
I
say.
know, and that I think is quite going back to the point about the rationale to expose this sort of activities and raise the costs for those that are engaging in them. I think here is where a problem is that 3 years of silence when evidence was certainly available and some was in the public sphere, we might not have known, we might not have had the guilty plea, we might not have known about the payments, but we knew from other investigations that these people had been in touch with Polish people spying for Russia. We knew this sort of thing, and yet it was never in the public sphere. It was never made publicly like an object of public discussion, I guess.
Like for example, I don't know, at the moment, my sad sack, just to give a brief preview, will be the BBC, right? So we're going to talk about this edited tape, and like literally, if you're driving a car in the UK, you're hearing people going on about this stuff, right? And yet, like Nathan Gill is not a name to most British citizens.
No, you came into the office on one Monday and made a joke about him pleading guilty. I had no idea what he was talking about. I genuinely had to look it up. The name had I didn't even know the name in my head, and there's someone who's doing a weekly podcast.
But in a sense, it might have been also because he had been somewhat out of politics for obvious reasons
for so long.
Yeah.
Unless you picked it up initially.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. But other than that, do you have any other guesses as to why this story just hasn't, even after the guilty plea, it didn't really seem to rear its head for like a day?
It featured a bit in the Caerphilly by-election when Farage was in Wales. He was being asked about this.
Yeah. You can do an easy deflection of I didn't know about this. I didn't know. I'm shocked by this. But then it just died.
This is something that somewhat has surprised me. Like many things have surprised me about the current Labour government. But one of the things that has surprised me the most is you might recall when we had a pre-elections event. One of the things that you mentioned that I thought, this sounds about right, is that there had been so many financial scandals in the Tory era that basically Labour coming in could have like a field day, simply investigating them, exposing them, and so on.
A rolling news cycle.
And take charge of the news cycle and so on. And I think there has been a bit on the woman that sold personal protection equipment.
Michelle Moan.
Yeah. There's been a bit of that, but not much more.
Do you see her beside the yacht?
Yeah. I think there has been a real failure to convince people. But then again, we go back to the previous point about the mistrust that people have for the government. But to my mind, that might very well be true. It's probably true. But the media is primarily failing people. The story is being followed only by very niche and very nerdy and activist media outlets, and not by major ones who are very quick to jump on other stories, and particularly when the stories are threatening the BBC and so on.
So could I just say, though, I think one thing, to be fair to journalists, the kind of investigative capacity of organizations like the BBC is now essentially zero. Like, so a story, I think, to really bring to like the public a story like this, you need a kind of an hour-long special that really gets into, like, probably takes a couple of months to at least prepare. And the kind of flagship programs like, I don't know, Panorama is one we're going to come back to, they've basically been defunded. So journalism is now largely a kind of analysis of press clippings given by the politicians, and then literally like yesterday's newspapers, today's fish and chips, and there's some other nonsense. I mean, we talked about what's happening in America a little bit, but like, so that's part of my analysis of what's gone a bit wrong here, is the kind of journalist and journalism that this story needs is not like financially viable, or certainly not being supported in the kind of media infrastructure very well.
But I mean, I think there are also some stories in which the message is very simple, And you could give it a try at hammering at the very simple message. I don't know, an MEP from Reform UK got money from Russia.
Yeah, that's it.
And it doesn't require investigation because all of the investigation has already been done and is already out there and is pled guilty.
Yeah.
And even the reaction within Parliament has been somewhat subdued. I think at one point, Starmer said that Nigel Farage has questions to answer.
That's it.
Well, so ask those questions.
Yeah.
But another, just to say quickly, sorry, and so that's one of my reasons why. But the other one is a bit more troubling and kind of difficult to say, really. But I think, like, if I think of The Thick of It, which is a political satire show, like, you never really want to launch an inquiry until you're sure the inquiry's not going to start looking at your emails, right?
Yeah.
Now, like, what this points out to me is, like, the permeability of the British political system to relatively small amounts of money for influence.
Yeah.
Like, you want to buy this kind of, you want to get a senator to stand up in Congress and say something, you got to be spending some money. Yeah. But they're giving this guy 10 grand a pop.
Total.
Not even a pop, in total.
Yeah. Like, I can command that kind of fee for some work, right? Honestly.
No, you can't. But it's nice that you think that,
But like, that, and you know, I often say, you know, that for me, when you had this story about Keir Starmer getting, like, whatever it was, amount of pounds worth of clothes donated to him, like, as an incoming prime minister, like, how can someone like that lead the kind of story when, you know, he's a savvy operator? I think he knows if we're going to really start looking at money in politics in the UK, and there won't be many politicians left standing.
Maybe.
But I think about...
I mean, and of course, sorry, I think Russian influence in US politics, in UK politics, has been very long-standing from the Boris Johnson coming back alone, drunk at an Italian airport after having a party at the what's the Russian guy who owns the newspaper that he
Lavrov?
that he made
Lebedev.
Yeah. So I think there has been a long history of...
Did you see the picture of him in the airport?
Exactly.
He looks like he's been at a stag party and
of a Russian...
there's no protection with him.
No, exactly.
He just... Was he a minister at that point?
It was,
and like there were... Anyway, it was a terrible...
I think it was
scandal.
a Perugia airport in Italy. But anyway, between Russian covert operations in the UK, which received very little reaction, all the way to assassination attempts or assassinations...
Successes,
to Russian money in UK society, in London, in clubs and so on. I think Russian influence in the UK has been very, very extensive. I'm not like a leading expert on this, but a hunch would be that it has been perhaps even more extensive after the end of the Cold War than during the Cold War with oligarchs and so on.
Well, if you think that bank transferring Nathan Gill a few G's every now and again gets you what you want.
Gets you, like you can write the speech for him.
You don't need a Cold War backdrop to achieve these goals.
No. But could I just have one more thing about the speech and what he says, right? So I think it's interesting. There's a couple of very interesting things about it. Like, two other members of the same party essentially say the same thing.
Yeah.
And I think plausibly have denied that they received any cash to do so. And the message is quite... in kind of rhetoric, it would be like opening a front, right? So you're not saying, Russia's great, and like you're saying, hey, hang on, like both sides, the other side is flawed too, which
this has been a long-standing Russian, like the both-sidism, whataboutism. These are quintessential sort of active measure strategies, basically.
But that's where it's like so interesting, because it has the seeds of truth, and it has a sort of acceptability in a liberal sensibility of like, well, I don't, whenever I hear about I don't know, in Hungary or in Poland, state takeover of media, I'm not generally for that, right? Where like, so I'm like, that is bad. So it just, I think what he said, the fact that others went along with it, and the fact that you can't just dismiss it out of hand if you want to call yourself a liberal. It was very crafted in that sense.
But I think is why it it's also why it's so successful, because it can find constituencies in different places. Like somebody from the left might very well support the same argument as would somebody.
I mean, many there's
from,
Irish MEPs who are broadly aligned with that,
or somebody
no,
from
money coming
or
from
somebody
Russia,
from the right. Like we saw the same thing to a certain extent in Italy. You had parties and politicians that for a long time were very, very aligned with Putin and whatever Putin said or did, like the Northern League. But you had others that instead tended to buy more this sort of both sidism, whataboutism type of the argument. For example, in the 5-star movement and so on, you had people that went along with it because they found it like morally and politically persuasive.
It was a mind virus,
but
Elon Musk style, yeah.
But again, it's the same thing. That's what makes active measures particularly successful, because they are credible. The infiltration of the peace movement, you had people that genuinely believe that U.S. missiles on European soil were terrible, and they probably were terrible if you ignore the fact that the Soviet Union had already deployed its missiles in Eastern Europe. But there were people that generally were part of the peace movement or the nuclear freeze movement, and you can never disentangle what was genuine from what was not. So if Gill had gone on Ukrainian TV and said, "Oh, Putin is the best thing since sliced bread," people would have thought, is he paid to say that?
Yeah.
But he goes on TV and says, political repression is bad because
we're standing up for democracy.
Yeah, we shouldn't. Yeah,
we're from the center of electoral protection.
Yeah, we shouldn't respond to political repression with other political repression. That sounds like PC and all.
Yeah. A couple of the statements, I was just trying to see if I could find any of them that he had said. In October 2018, he said that the current government before an election is putting undue pressure on independent TV channels like News One and Channel 112. If you do not have a free press, you cannot have a free and fair election. Support for freedom and democracy should be universal, whether back home in the UK, here in the EU, or in Ukraine, or anywhere else in the world. The government of Ukraine must ensure that these principles are sacrosanct, and that means allowing TV stations to broadcast whether you like the message or not. So these were kind of the pro-112 statements that he was making, and he said,
and again, very good statement.
Yeah,
and on the face
there's
of
deniability
it,
about it.
fine. Yeah. Except then, this is post Crimea. Is a TV channel that is pumping out pro-Russia.
Yeah, you're actually about to have a major land war with these guys. You probably don't need enemy within saying how great they are, right?
Yeah, he hijacked a debate on human rights in Kazakhstan to protest much more pressing human rights issues on our doorstep, saying that the current government before an election is putting undue pressure on these channels. So there is a terrifying image in this blog. It's just like a close-up of his face, making me very uncomfortable. I suppose I wanted to just, as my kind of final question, is to kind of go back to, we were talking about Labour. Obviously, I'm not going to inquire about like political party communication strategies or anything, but I always kind of thought that, at least at this point in time, Russia was a pretty free hit politically to go after.
It was Boris Johnson's like safe space, right?
Yeah, it's just something that you can always talk about, that people aren't really going to get sick of hearing you talk. Well, they might get sick of hearing you talk about it, but they're not going to like disagree with you.
Like the public has largely supported the British position.
Exactly. So, I don't know. I guess just why, you kind of touched on it to be fair earlier, but just why is there no oxygen for this? Do you think that there is some kind of like, I don't want to get into like conspiracy theories about who's bought and paid for by Russia, but they're just, I kind of, you think about the Labour government over the last 15 months, just getting absolutely railroaded by scandals and poor performance and polling disasters.
But they form now a circular firing squad.
Yeah, exactly. They're now briefing against each other, trying to shoot down leadership challenges. And like, you have this free hit on the side where you could just take the heat off yourself for a little bit, and anytime reform pop up, you can just say, well, it's worth pointing out that Nathan Gill, the head of Reform Wales,
I mean, if I'm doing political advertising, I'm getting Nigel Farage in the Russian outfit on a big billboard, bought and paid for. Like, you can say what you want if you say it with humor in political advertising.
Yeah, I guess it's just open question to you both: is that why do you think there's been such a hesitation from the political class to touch this story?
I think my sense is that it's more like and hesitation on the part of specifically the government, prime minister and other ministers. Because broadly within think tanks, also think tanks that are very close to government and are listened to by the government, say RUSI, for example, there is an increased effort to point out how dangerous what we're now calling state threats, which means threats below the threshold of war, which include sabotage, assassination, this type of disinformation campaigns, and so on, how dangerous they are. There has been a great push from Parliament to highlight how dangerous these are. The Intelligence and Security Committee of Parliament has been pushing out fairly regularly now reports on one on Russia, one on China, the latest one on Iran, and these type of threats that they pose, including what we could call active measures or disinformation and so on. It doesn't seem to be making any breaches or any impact or any headway in government. And to be honest, I don't know why. Sometimes, and I'm not an expert on British politics, so I couldn't say what would be electorally successful and what would not. But I do have the impression that there would be some electoral easy wins that could be achieved by doing something or not doing something and so on. And they're simply passed on. I can't help but think, and again, this is my personal opinion, that this is part of the current Labour leadership desperate attempt to still attract reform and right-wing voters, which concerns so many areas of what they've been doing, from higher education to migration and so on, which is, I think, politically and electorally foolish. Like, we are academics, so we should remind people that there are tons and tons of peer-reviewed studies conducted in the UK, across Europe, that show that this strategy never actually works. If a sort of center-left party chases right-wing voters, those right-wing voters do not move center-left, but they think, actually, if I'm supposed to vote for the fake right-wing party, I might as well vote for the original one. So it doesn't actually work. I think is part and parcel of the same issue, because there is a concern within think tanks, within Parliament. My sense is that there is a major concern within certain parts of government, like defence and various branches of the defence establishment, but it doesn't push through.
Do you think that...
Well, just to say, though, I mean, we have had a massive increase in defence spending. So
that's why I'm saying it is being picked up by...
It's the kind of public conversation, I guess, that we're talking about. And just, I think there's something just very disquieting about it. And it's kind of easier in a way not to think about it. Like, I think most of us, whenever we stop work, spend ages trying not to think about politics, because it's so kind of grim. And especially when you start to look at these kind of issues, like that I think media is also a form of like entertainment. People have to choose what they watch. And like, I'd much rather watch a game of football than hear about Vrugschen and his connections to the t-shirt industry. And do you know what I mean? I think it's not it's a fundamentally kind of pessimistic story.
Do you think that Russia will feel validated by the Nathan Gill story? Do you think they'll be relatively okay with the losses of Ukrainian billionaire oligarchs or whatever, and feel... Because I guess it goes to the point that you mentioned earlier about, we don't really know like the extent of Russian influence fully.
No.
This might be a drop in the ocean relative to everything else, but in terms of feeling how perhaps accessible Reform UK might be, or any political figure.
I mean, it might depend on the extent to which this dies down. If it dies down and it stops at Gill, Russia will have paid a very small price.
10 Gs.
No, I mean, also like a moral and reputational price. I mean,
It was a joke.
which I thought which they might think is worth it. I have to say, from my perspective, I think the UK has a history of underreacting to Russian covert operations until it's very much too blatant and too late.
Yeah.
So very little reaction to the poisoning of Litvinenko.
Yeah.
Stronger reaction to the Skripals, but massive reaction in terms of expelling diplomats and intelligence officers only after the invasion of Ukraine. We know that has some second-order effects because, to a certain extent, we start to have some evidence that expelling intelligence officials and this sort of people actually pushes states to rely more extensively on organized crime, on which states might have less control and so on. There's a all different kind
You're
of
better
issue.
off the spies are kind of a buffer.
Yeah. But underreaction to this sort of thing, as I mentioned at the start, I think is as much of a problem as overreaction would be. Overreaction might risk going on a witch hunt, as you said earlier, and as Donald Trump used to say, but also losing credibility, because if everything is Russia, eventually people will start thinking, well, nothing is Russia. But at the same time, no reaction at all just makes it fair game for Russia. And we're talking about Russia because the Nathan Gill example is Russia, but I have no doubt that there are other states very much involved in similar activities. They will see it as fair game or as an open field to interfere.
And just to say, in case anyone is watching from Russia, because we've been talking about Russia as the kind of protagonist, I mean,
pretty confident nobody's watching for Russia.
I kind of hope not, to be honest. The CIA, so another book you gave me was by Stoner Saunders about the just incredible investment that the American secret intelligence community put into European cultural flowering in the 60s and 70s. So it's not, and there is an argument about how much they do now and whether they've pulled off, but it's not a weapon that only one side has kind of used.
No,
in certainly in the 20th century.
I mean, if Thomas Reid has a point, I think, is the fact that certainly with the 1970s, the US government might still do sort of disinformation light, but they no longer engage in the fabrication of fake government documents attributed to their enemy. I think that is one of the distinctions. Like the Soviet Union goes on to doctor, in the real sense of the word, not the BBC use currently, some documents that are a mix of real document and fake pages and so on. This is stopped. But cultural influence, support for cultural and economic front organizations and so on is very much something that both sides do. So that I'm doing the Nathan Gill switch here and say, both sides are actually.
Yeah, just to say, Stoner Saunders, one of our really interesting considerations is how many people who are actually really second rate got to be sort of famous because they were aligned with a certain ideological message that was essentially being sponsored.
But I mean, another interesting point in that book by I think Francis Stoner or whatever.
Francis, I think so.
Which is the same point you made earlier about the other MEPs traveling to Ukraine and so on. Is always the game of witting or unwitting. There were a few people within these cultural organizations that knew that the money was not coming from this very wealthy donor from Western Europe, but was actually coming
from mysterious benefactor. Yeah,
exactly.
Don't ask questions.
But was actually coming from the CIA. But there were plenty of other people who were actually entirely unwitting of the whole thing, and I'm very much confident that the same is happening today. Some people might go to an anti-NATO protest because they're really upset about whatever NATO is doing, without knowing that is actually funded, organized, inspired by Russian intelligence. Or the same thing, they might go on a fun trip to Ukraine in 2018 or whatnot, fully paid by this pro-European democracy consortium and so on.
They wouldn't ask too many questions about where that came from.
That's a free holiday.
When you're given probably a script that looks fairly neutral, fairly PC, so why should you not do it? They might as well have been unwitting.
This is called I think useful idiot is the term that comes a lot in this kind of discussion.
Great name for this podcast.
Useless, unfortunately, as well as idiots.
Just idiots, I think. That's fair. I think Great Craic sad sack time.
Yeah, that was deep dive. Thanks. Yeah, it was
whereas-
really good to go into it. Yeah, okay. Do you want to?
Yes,
Kick us off?
I can start. So my nominations for this week's Great Craic and sad sack are Wes Streeting and Sir Keir Starmer, respectively. On Tuesday, I believe, Downing Street released a briefing basically saying anyone who's considering mounting a leadership challenge, don't. We're ready to shut you down. And there were some rumors around Downing Street having concrete, explicit evidence that, well, explicit might make that sound worse than it is, that Wes Streeting was considering a serious leadership bid.
This is the website. So there was a website like registered Wes Streeting, Wes for Leader or something.
Oh no, I did not see that. I did not see that. But all I heard was that they.
If there is one
they had
person that would
evidence.
be worse than the current prime minister.
Streeting.
Allegedly.
Streeting does terrify me. To be fair, yeah.
But Sir Keir Starmer would be the sad sack because as a result of this briefing, Wes Streeting was then put on the news round on Wednesday to basically shut down any allegations that he was considering a leadership challenge. And despite your disdain for Wes Streeting, he actually came across very well. He actually performed quite well, at least.
He's a good media performer.
He's a good media performer, which contrasts quite
There's not
aggressively.
many of them in UK politics.
Especially when you contrast that with Keir Starmer, who's very
Sir Keir
wooden,
Starmer,
and
Sir
Sir
Keir
Keir Starmer. Sorry, I say a bow as every time I say his name. There is a quite dramatic contrast between the two. So Starmer in trying to seal off any... I think there was a good analogy that said something like... Starmer's shut all the bunker doors to not let anybody in, but he doesn't realize that he's not in the bunker himself. So it's he's had a bit of a tough.
Well, it's
tough time.
apparently the kind of what's the word? The Eminence Grise, the political operator, is Chief of Staff Morgan McSweeney.
Yeah.
Is so UK politics, like probably most political systems, operates a system of like briefing journalists, like unattributed briefings, but the journalist builds a reputation by not by developing contacts with people who actually are on the inside of the power structure. And so the Morgan McSweeney is being accused, allegedly, blah, 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 of being the one who's actually started briefing against, let's be clear, like a senior minister in his own government.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's what's happened. And Wes Streeting is sort of the injured party in one way of spinning it, and that's, I think, the way he's...
But he's definitely come out of this
And
better.
I think
than he
now
was
he's
a
like,
week
oh,
ago.
do you know what? Maybe I should.
Maybe I will, yeah. Maybe I could.
So he definitely had a good couple of days.
Yeah, he would be my Great Craic and Sir Keir Starmer for the sad sack. Luca?
So who had a good week? Part of my, I guess, based on my research, I think British intelligence overall had a good week. They are showing that they're standing up to the Trump administration when they're doing things that are illegal. Earlier in the week, there was already a story leaked by someone we don't really know. I'm not saying leaked by British intelligence, simply leaked to the press that MI5 was very disappointed with FBI Director Kash Patel because he had basically promised MI5 director to keep in place an FBI agent in London. But by the time he had made the promise, the post had already been cut.
Nice.
So the director of MI5 wasn't too pleased. And then more recently this week, there was a news story that UK would stop sharing intelligence with the Trump administration that might lead to the targeting of boats off the coast of Venezuela.
Which is like a simmering crisis,
which other countries have already done as well. Colombia has also decided to stop intelligence because these strikes are illegal, and so the UK government does not want to be implicated in really the killing or assassination of what are, after all, civilians, even if, as the Trump administration suggests, they are involved in the drug trade.
But we need those sea lanes for the world economy to operate, right? You can't just have people bombing boats in the middle of the sea. Once the tip or tat there, it's very hard to get the materials. Like, it would be bad.
I'll break the rules and have two for Terrible Week. Terrible week by U.S. Democrats in general. Senators bowed to Trump to end the shutdown when they had a clear victory in sight.
Yeah.
And then yesterday, when the new Epstein Files email story broke, and one could hope that we would have a good news cycle.
Yeah.
covering that and exposing the role of Trump in these emails. 6 Democrats in the House decided to vote with Republicans to end the shutdown. So the cover page of the New York Times has already changed to Trump signing the bill ending the shutdown, and only at the bottom you have the Epstein.
Which is just a tiny little thing. Yeah.
Tiny little thing. Another person I thought had a great week, which came with some terrible things.
Was Jeffrey Epstein?
No. He had a bad week some time ago, I think. Was the
He's
president
permanently in the sad sack now.
yeah. Was the president of Syria, who surprisingly, in spite of being on the terrorist list up until like a few months ago, traveled to the White House to reach some new agreements with the United States, including joining the anti-ISIS coalition, which is still going. Is about 90 countries at the moment still fighting the remnants of ISIS. So now Syria is part of that fighting. But what I thought was, I don't know, between hilarious and tragic, is that during the meeting at the White House, Trump started spraying the poor guy with one of his new Trump fragrances, which is
That's what I do to Luca when he comes into the office.
the 7 billion side hustle in this presidency. For somebody who studies assassination, somebody spraying another foreign official with a liquid is always concerning. And then Trump proceeded to ask the president of Syria how many wives he had.
Just the one. Yeah,
there is a video of this that is doing the rounds on social media. It's incredibly cringe. But of course, if you read the report done by the BBC on how this encounter went, it looks like a very high-stake diplomatic encounter as opposed to like a telemarket farce. Because I'm guessing the BBC is in a tough spot at the moment.
Yeah, they're not having a great time. I will just say before your sad seg, I don't know how we'll be able to get this on camera, but I'd just like to show the perfume. It's atrocious.
That's very good.
He's looking good. He's in good shape, that lad.
Victory 45, 47.
Yeah.
And it doesn't even look like it. I mean, it's just generic Oscar trophy, man.
Which I guess goes alongside the Trump watches and Trump phone and
Trump coin we were looking at yesterday, which is just called Trump. Like
Trump, like $8.
Yeah,
it's trading at $8.
Yes. Do you
Trump
accept
crypto and
Trump
and
crypto?
whatnot?
Yeah, Trump steak. He had Trump University.
I mean, to be honest,
but we shouldn't
if
talk
the
about
whole
that.
point of the second Trump presidency is for him to make a massive amount of money and we don't end up with total fascism in the United States and a catastrophic war abroad, I would be happy.
That's a pretty good success. That's a big checklist that they had.
Those things aren't mutually exclusive.
No.
I'm gonna leave Nathan Gill.
Can I? Okay,
as
so the end of Luca's
this.
comments starts me into my sad sack of the week, which is the British Broadcasting Corporation, otherwise known as the BBC.
Yeah.
So they've had a hell of a week. So the same public who is quite disinterested in actual like Russian assets being elected to like the European Parliament by them.
Allegedly.
No, he said he's guilty, right?
Yeah.
That's guilty.
Allegedly.
Well, I don't know. The Russian asset, someone who's subject to bribe to talk in favor of a foreign country, that happened. So that was like a minor scandal, but a major scandal, and it was a major scandal, was the cutting of the Trump speech in this Panorama episode, which I have taken the time to view that, and there's been several kind of podcasts covering this. It is egregious, right? I think it has to be said that if you watch this as a kind of naive viewer, you would infer a lot more direct evidence for like incitement to riot than if you'd taken account of the kind of distance in between and the content in between the two clips that are spliced together. So however, making TV always involves boiling down speeches and things like that. So the BBC.
But I think. Sorry to jump in. I think the rhetoric that has been used is the speech has been doctored. The speech has not been doctored. The speech has been cut and pasted, which are two considerably different things.
Yeah, clipped. Either through error or through intention, in a manner that misleads the viewer. And so part of the BBC's it's really his core asset is impartiality as a kind of virtue that's stitched across the organization. It started.
You can see the impartiality by the extent in which, for example, the Green Party is present on the BBC, as opposed to, say, another party that used to be polling, give or take, in the same area of the of the Green Party. Allegedly.
Nonetheless, the internal processes to kind of correct this failed, or certainly like operated at such a glacial pace that it was equivalent to failing. And so we've had this kind of memo released, drawing, this is kind of, how would I say it, making public the disquiet of this figure who was meant to be part of the ethical kind of watchdog system, blew the whistle. And the BBC is now subject to a potential lawsuit from Donald Trump. We were talking earlier, I'd be quite happy to see that eventuate.
Develop, yeah.
If not just because Donald Trump being in the UK to fight a lawsuit would maybe stop him bombing some ships.
You would think.
The BBC Director General and Head of News have both resigned. The organisation is currently literally like a giant ship. It's a bit like the... what was the one that foundered on the Italian coast? Do you remember that ship, that cruise ship that foundered? It's a Costa Concordia. It's a little bit like that. It's essentially a rudderless ship. The leadership has abandoned the ship. And there's a sustained and massive, and this has been going for years, campaign to defund the BBC, to say that the license rate is, I don't know, socialism or unfair or privileging the media class or whatever you want to say. And the BBC is basically now in a I would characterize it as in a kind of fetal position, simply trying to preserve its internal organs from damage, as everyone kicks the crap out of it. And consequently, the shape of its coverage of American politics has become so impartial as to be misleading, I would suggest.
I think their headline this morning about the Epstein email says that Trump is mentioned in the Epstein emails, and I thought, is mentioned all right?
Yeah, that's not false. Just for the context, the splice clip suggested that Trump told the crowd, "We're going to walk down to the Capitol, and I'll be there with you, and we fight like hell." The words were taken from sections of a speech almost an hour apart, and it did not include a section in which Trump said he wanted supporters to peacefully and patriotically make your voices heard. But thankfully, the response from Caroline Leavitt, the Trump's press secretary, was very rational and very appropriate. She said she accused the corporation of taking the word of Hamas with total truth. I think that's a pretty healthy response to the situation. But did you do Great Craic?
Yeah, but just to say, like, this is the ontological, epistemological slop that we're actually swimming around in, and people are like, so again, I come always back to Steve Bannon, like filled his own with shit.
Yeah.
Welcome to Steve Bannon's fantasy. In Great Craic is another beneficiary of the Labour fallout, Ed Miliband.
Yeah.
So Ed Miliband is having quite the second act, having literally being like nailed on in 2015. I lost £100 betting on this guy to be Prime Minister. So that's some background.
Shocked you lost on a political prediction.
So it's nearly unbelievable.
Welcome to our podcast on political forecasting.
So, but he's kind of recycled himself, as it were, as he's gotten into this kind of environmental energy, which is, as far as I can see, the only positive narrative that the government has to
until
present.
the infrastructure bill, at least.
Well, and he's just announced, so Rolls-Royce, I believe, are going to be producing three, essentially like
3 cars,
mini nuclear reactors. It's going to be
Okay.
hosted on Anglesey, which is an island off the coast of Wales. So it's a rare win.
Isn't that where Nathan Gill's from?
He is from Anglesey.
Yeah.
But they're talking about jobs, investment, right? This is one of the, now, whether Welsh Labour can claim success, he did mention Eluned Morgan's name as like contributing to this, so they're going to be trying to ride on this.
Okay.
And he's been very, gently playing down any interest that he might have in the leadership role, and I think with some plausibility because he was so viciously pilloried when he was the leader, and he failed kind of publicly. But nonetheless, his reputation, he's starting to look like he's starting to look like a much stronger, more kind of mature politician. And we don't actually have many of them in British politics, where people with that kind of deep experience who've had some defeats and knockbacks and have kind of come back again.
Is the perennial questions of our time, isn't it? Like, are bad politicians now looking good because they've actually improved, or because everybody else around them is so bad that what we thought was bad, say in 2015, now is actually a great statesman activity?
Even he was crucified for eating a bacon sandwich. Like that shows where the bar was at the time. Like,
I mean, I've eaten bacon sandwiches.
Like, we were
I
talking
can't
about
hold it against anyone.
we
Really.
were talking about this before the start of the show. Marjorie Taylor Greene now sounds mainstream, which I think is like great indication of our times.
Yeah. So with end times approaching, the end time for this podcast is.
Have you got somewhere to be? We were going to be here for 4 hours. We got the whole morning booked.
I'm on my sabbatical, so I have to go and meditate now. Yeah.
Well, unless anybody has any final thoughts.
No.
Thanks very much.
Thanks a lot for having me, guys.
On.
Thank you for coming on, and thank you everybody for listening. And we'll see you next week.